Alright folks, I am back with my second attempt here to, well, you've never seen the first attempt because I had to take it down, uh, because I made some mistakes. I'm talking about a subject about which I don't know much. I mean, that's Grand Tactician in general, but specifically it's the Navy. But I have tried to learn as much as I can about blockading, and while I'll call this a tutorial, it really is best described as this is the best of my knowledge. So, uh, this is all done on a fresh 61 campaign, but it's a modified campaign that starts on April 15th, so after the war is broken out, and it's actually using the summer 61 stuff. So a lot of the fleets are already set up when you do it that way. Uh, that's fine. What I'm looking at is kind of what ships are best suited for blockading, but it's not that simple, because as with everything in life, there's a cost. And so I'm going to try to look at the efficiency of how different ships blockade for the amount they cost. If you don't like numbers, you're going to hate this video, because I don't really know of any other way to do this except really digging into the numbers. And I'll say that once I figured out how blockading worked, I say I really do not like this part of the game. It is not well conceived, or it's not well executed if it was well conceived. But no more introduction. Let's just go ahead and get into it. And I'll start with an anecdote about how this campaign began. I had about 20 4th rate steamers, which, if you're not that familiar with ships and all that, here we'll oh, I don't actually want to do that. All right, we'll take a look at these. Right, they're almost the worst, like the lowest of the low, just a notch above Toby. I'm sure you're thinking. 4th rate steamers, they're not great, but I had 20 of them, and they were all in the Chesapeake. 7 in blockade, and yet when I checked all the enemy ports, and it came up with not blocked, I said, well, that can't be right. I got 20 ships here. And what it turned out is it wasn't this fleet, because if you know your geography, these folks are a long way from home, and what it was is that there was a different fleet that was in here I didn't see, and once it came out and we wrecked it, then we set everybody to it actually came out to attack Fort Monroe, and it got obliterated. And as you'll see, most wooden ships get obliterated by level 2 forts and by level 1 forts. But then when I set those 20 or so 4th rate steamer, basically the junk quality, we got about 45% blockade on all those enemy trade nodes, which was pretty, or enemy ports. So it wasn't too bad. But if you do that, you set it to blockade. Oh, and this other trick you got to do, you got to zoom out and zoom in for it to work, of course. So right now you see like this says not blocked. All right, we'll take, I don't know what these guys are, and it doesn't matter. If you just set it to blockade, you're like, huh, it's not doing anything. You got to zoom out so you can't see it. I know. This is how this works. And you got to zoom in, and then it will tell you. So, anyways, you got to do that every single time you wanna test this. So it's a lot of fun. What were the results? Let's skip to the findings here. All right, I did not do everything in the world I could have done, but I did do a lot of the wooden ships, and then some of the ironclads. Right, this is an early campaign. I actually didn't do the ironclad frigate in this one. I did it in the first test video, which was at that point the middle of 63 to early 64. Ironclad frigates took almost a year to construct, and I wasn't trying to do that. I mean, this is kind of geared towards those who are just starting out in 61. So I looked at kind of what's available. Now, what are these numbers, right? If you hate math, you're probably hiding underneath the desk or something. But it kind of has to be this way. So these numbers here are probably some of the more important ones. And what they show you is if you have one ship in a fleet, because it matters, and you set it to blockade, There's no perks on the fleet or anything like that. I didn't do it with the exact same commander, but all the commanders are pretty much the same. They had usually two or fewer stars for each attribute. They were not the worst, but they certainly were not the best. And so, because it was just going to take so much longer if we did just the same commander, I know that that would give us a more accurate test. Take all of this. You can take it with more than a grain of salt, but not much more, because a lot of things matter. But basically, one ship's tender gunboat, a fleet of just one of those, you set it to blockade, and it will do 5%. It'll block that. Whatever port is in its radius, that big circle. So if you don't remember, right, it's the big outer circle. Right? Any ship that's within that or any port within it is, in this case, going to get blocked 17%. By the way, I'll come back to this, but if you're able to get a port within this dark, smaller circle, it will do 2.5 times what it's doing here. I should not try to do math on the spot. That would be 34 plus 8.5 is what, 42.5%? From just one fleet. So if you can get real close, you can get a lot of value. But let's just stay with where we are. All right. So that's what that value means, right? You get 5%. And so, oh well, frigates, that's 30%. That must be the best. Well, certainly it's good for a single ship, right? You can get 30% all by its lonesome. That is great. Right? The poor motor schooner, ironclads. Oh, I knew they weren't great at blockading. Yeah, that's all kind of true. But there are some catches. The first, and this is the part that it just absolutely drives me bonkers. What do you think happens when you add a second ship's tender gunboat to that fleet? I would assume, well, maybe it goes to 10%, right? Because 5% per each. Yeah, you would think that. But that's not what this game does. They make it less than that. So I actually kind of thought that maybe more ships together would actually be exponentially more efficient. But it actually works the opposite here. And the rule of thumb is that the second ship you add will add about half of whatever that weight is. So if you added, say you got an 8% blockade with a 4th rate steamer, and then you added a second 4th rate steamer, it wouldn't go to 16%. It'd more likely go to about 12%. And if you add a third, it adds even less. So it might go to, 14%. So basically, as the blockading fleet gets larger, it gets less and less good. And there's even, back to the frigate example, this is absolutely nuts. So I had a frigate, it was doing 30%, and I took a motor schooner, which, for other reasons, we'll talk about how efficient, right? This is kind of the takeaway we're getting to. But I added a motor schooner to it, which for its cost is actually one of the most efficient ships out there. The average of the fleet went to 28%. The fleet actually got worse at blockading because I added a motor schooner, which wasn't as good as the frigate. I don't know what to say, folks. I mean, it's the game. It's the way it works. And so the implication of that is that the most cost-effective way to blockade is to have a bunch of one-ship fleets, right? Why put two of them together and get 7% or 8% when you can just have two of them separate and get 10%? So there's that issue, which you need to be aware of. And if you hate micro-intensive stuff, you can see how this could become a micro-intensive endeavor. All right. The other kind of part here that gets us to, how efficient a ship is how much does it cost? And even these numbers, as careful as I've tried to be to calculate them, I will tell you, I'm certain they're incomplete. But I don't know enough about the game to give you the rest. So again, a grain of salt, maybe more, but the construction values are in the, right, this is all in the original modding Excel sheet. So I took those, and then I went into the game, and if you go to the trade panel, it will give you the average price of each of those goods. So the construction cost of one ship is actually pretty easy to do. You take the amount of wood, you multiply it by the average, just for, nice round figures. And then you add the cost of all the wood, plus the iron, the machine parts. I can't find a cost for naval artillery, so it's listed here, but it doesn't. I don't know how to figure it in the cost, so yet another shortcoming of this. And we know that the approximate construction cost of a ship's tender gunboat is about $57,000. Right, schooner $63,000, and at the higher end of things, we have about $210,000 for frigate. Steam frigates, I think, are just terrible for their cost. But anyways, they're $337,000 for one of them. So that's where I did my original kind of tutorial on how to do this. But I left out the capacity stuff, and I shouldn't have done that. So when a ship is launched, it's launched, I believe, full of this stuff. And using the same process, I can find the average price. And these were actually fairly close to what they were, all of these prices were, to what they were 2-3 years later when I tried this the first time. Anyways. And so I did the total cost of these three things. And that gives us a different number, right? So for the ship's tender, it doesn't take that much. It's 103 coal, 100 provisions, 44 ammo. It doesn't take much. And that's only $27,000. So the total cost of outfitting it plus its construction is here. And this is where you see some really big differences, right? $84,000 to build an outfit, oh my goodness, outfit a ship's tender gunboat. We can see that that's about half what it is for the junky fourth-rate steamer. And then at the top end here, the frigate is $1.6 million. It's hard to see because they don't throw commas in here. It's almost $1.8 million for a steam frigate, just to build the thing, equip it, and send it out to sea. So what this column is, before I talk about the shortcomings of this, is it is how much blockading, like the percentage points of blockading, divided by the cost of building and launching the ship before it needs to re-equip. Right. So we look at these dollar amounts. At the most efficient is the ship's tender gunboat. Right. It costs you about $17,000 to get 1 percentage point of blockade going. Right? I mentioned that the brig and the motor schooner, they're pretty good. The bark is not quite as good, but it's still pretty good. Some of the worst ones in here, these two, the steam frigate, the side wheel frigate. This is the generic frigate, which is okay. And then some of the other pretty bad ones for their cost. I was surprised the sloop of war is that bad. That cost ineffective. I don't know. I don't know much about the Navy or Civil War naval things, but it just seemed like it would have been better than that. The second-rate steamer, which it's almost the Walmart frigate, is actually about the same blockade efficiency as the frigate. So anyways, fourth-rate steamer is actually pretty good as well, and third-rate steamer is kind of meh. Now, this makes it a little bit easier to see what's more efficient at what. And I'll also mention I did the same thing for ironclads. I didn't do the frigate this time, but actually the ironclads are like pretty decent at blockading. The Monitor and the gunboat are the two I like the best. The ironclad river gunboat is an absolute beast, but it has very limited range. Like it took down level 1 forts like no problem, but by the time I tried to get it out past New Orleans, it ran out of supply, ran into a small fleet, and it evaporated because it ran out of supply. It disintegrated. So actually the Monitor and the gunboat are fairly efficient. The Monitor especially is just about as efficient as the most efficient wooden ships. I'll come back to this later, but why is this even not that good? It has to do with this the total cost of outfitting or consumables or whatever you want to call it, but basically keeping the ship afloat. And it's really the provisions and the ammo cost. Coal is really pretty cheap and negligible in most of these, especially compared to the cost of provisions. Look, provisions are almost $200 a whack. And so when you got a frigate and a steam frigate that are taking $5,000, $4,800, a sidewheel frigate that's taking $4,000, that's a lot. And then, of course, the ammo at about, what, $90 a pop, and then, times almost 5,000 for these. What I don't know, I mean, ammo is pretty self-explanatory. They only use it when they're fighting. They don't use any of it for target shooting or anything like that. So it only goes when they're in combat. Provisions, I think they're assumed at a constant rate. And what I think is they're consumed at whatever this value is. But I don't know it. I don't know that for certain, so I didn't include it in here. And when you do that, actually these calculations are going to change, because the ship's tender gunboat, if you want to compare something, over equal, like, got to have a common denominator, right? That's refitting itself 2.5 times every time the frigate does. So the frigate's really expensive to refit, and they're not going to be close in terms of cost. Right, 5,000. So even this 2.5 times is 250 provisions to 2,500, and they're really expensive. I'm not saying that it's going to narrow things a lot, but it will narrow things a bit. My much beloved ironclad monitor down here has to go back every 20 days, and it's not that it's taking a lot, right? 118 provisions, oddly specific, but it would have to do that 5 times to get on the same denominator as those ships that can stay out for 100 days at a time. It's also going to limit their range from port, right? So you got to build out ports closer to where the action is if you want those ships with fewer days at sea to be able to get out there, because once they leave port, they're on the clock for when they're going to run out of supplies. So I haven't done this round of math because I don't know, and I'm just tired of doing math. Like, I'm spending more time trying to learn the game than play it. So I think these numbers are actually closer in practice, because I think this provision number is going to be a little bit higher because it can't stay out to sea as long as some of the other ships. So what we end up with, I think in the end, some of these ships are still going to be kind of where they are, but they're just not going to have quite the advantage that they do now. All right, that is that. And then there's the other kind of cost efficiency, right? There's actually, like, over a 12-month period, how much are you paying to keep a ship out, and how much is it able to blockade? Never mind the question of defend itself, but there's the question of how much am I paying to do damage to the other side, right? And what is that costing them? So the test I did, I don't know, maybe we can get this fleet kind of moving over here while I talk about it. What I did is I had, we'll call it a fleet here. It had the first frigate did 29% blockade. Added a second frigate, it's 40%. So there it is. Even again, when you add the next frigate, you don't get the full bounce that you would expect from it. I added a steam frigate, and then the blockading efficiency went up to just 43%. So this is getting to be expensive now. 2 frigates and a steam frigate. And I gave them the level 1 blockading perk, which actually worked as it should. It said it's a 10% boost, and they went from 43 to 47% blockade. And they blockaded everything from, I can never pronounce this place, Ononcock, over here to West Point. They actually got Rocket's Landing, and they actually got Elizabeth. And of course, they got the big boy, the level 4 port at Gosport. Now, even if this fleet gets here, it's not going to be the same, because there is now a fleet in Norfolk, so it's not going to, or in Gosport. But I was just trying to show you how the circle, if you place it correctly, it can cover all of those. Then I ran it for a month, and I looked at how much damage had the port taken from blockading when I started the month, and then how much had it taken at the end, subtracted the two, and that told me how much damage I had done. The long and the short of it was, after I did all those calculations, what's the monthly damage, and then multiplied it by 12 to get a how much damage am I denying the Confederacy by putting a fleet here, I was doing about denying them about $11 million in taxes. And it was costing me about $10 million. I just took the provisions number, and this is the one place where I actually put my hypothesis to the test, that's how that works, that every 100 days for frigates and steam frigates, they go back and they reload their provisions, and we just assume no ammo got shot. Using that assumption, it cost me about $10 million over 12 months for that fleet. And so I was basically giving as much damage as I was receiving, which might make it sound like a bust, and I was kind of afraid that the game would end up doing that. But remember, wrong tab, still wrong tab, this is not going well at all. Remember that with respect to the ratio, the Union economy is usually several times larger than the CSA's. And I'll say at this point, it's still early in the war, and things are going pretty well for this. I mean, had the CSA up at 296. I played the CSA a bunch, and it's never going this well for us. So here the advantage is maybe not quite 3-1. So if and I haven't done anything in campaign here. I just clicked some stuff and let it go. So I'm not playing optimally at all. I think usually the Union economy tends to be about 4 or 5-1 over the CSA. So if you can deal basically 50-50 damage, pay 10 million to deal 11 million, that's actually a relatively great trade for the Union. Are there other ways to do it? Without boring you too much, I went back to that Excel sheet and I said, well, how else can I get, right, they had 47%, how else can I get almost 47%? And so I took the cheapest option from that Excel sheet, which was the ship's tender gunboat, and how many of those do I need? I would need 10 of those, right? Because 10 fleets of one ship doing 5% each would give me 50%. Oh yeah. Sorry, should have told you that. So remember how I told you it's stupid how when you add ships to a fleet, it doesn't add their full value? Well, this is why that's stupid. So, and again, we have ships moving through here, so this is going to, let's see, do we actually have a clean example where we can show this? Okay, we got a cleaner. I think we have a cleaner example here. So we have to do our obligatory zoom out and zoom in. All right, of course. There we go. So that's 68%. So of course, now you're not going to be able to see this because it's probably going to go over 100 when I do this. But when I set these guys to blockade, they will add their full weight, whatever that was. And you're not going to be able to see it because it goes over 100%. It just stops at 100%. Oh, gotta love it. We might be able to do it with these guys. What do these guys have? All right, sloops of war. They're okay. Here, we'll move you guys down. Speed things up. But to belabor the point, because this is actually the kind of key to everything. So this is doing 27% here. I'm sure it's doing it here, and it popped up at the wrong time. Yeah, 27%. All right. And we're going to add to that a bunch of fourth-rate steamers. And we'll zoom out, zoom in. Who are going to bring it up to 47%. Right? And we were, what did I say? My goodness, Fort, go away. You're at 27%. So they added 20%. And now we'll take them off of blockade. Go back in, and if this worked correctly, they should be about 20%. Okay, that's how it works. So when ships are in their fleets will add 100% of whatever theirs is. So where these circles overlap, they add everything. But if I put these ships in this fleet, it would do far less than 47%. Again, it's so... let's just move on. But that's how the game does it. But here we are. This is actually a pretty nice spot, just to show you that if you position yourself correctly, you can do a lot with a little. All right, so that was the kind of relative trade you get with things. But yeah, you could put 10 ships tender gunboat. That's the story I was telling you, and then I calculated using the same formula where the ship's tender gunboat has to go back and refit every 40 days. I think I just figured that they have to go back like 9 times a year. And for 10 of them, anyways, I did the math, and it would cost about 1.8 million to get a 50% blockade from having 10 one-ship fleets with the most garbage ship there is, the ship's tender gunboat, which is approximately 1/5 the cost of using the 2 frigates and the 1 steam frigate. A way I could have cheesed it even harder is if I took a bunch of those ship's tender gunboats and I parked them right on the ports. Oh, there were ships in there. Or there was some ships in there. And then when you do that, it adds the 2.5%. I didn't actually do that because I just got tired. But my point is, you could do it with fewer than 10. I think you could probably get well over a 50% blockade on most all of these ports. That was an interesting way for that ship to retreat. You could probably get more with 8 or maybe 7 of those ship's tender gunboats. It's a little tough because they're off towards the margins, so when they're over here, maybe the full radius of their blockade wouldn't capture some of the other ports, but you hope to make that up by having a ship's tender gunboat or 2 parked right here. They'd be doing 12% blockade per ship on the port rather than the 5% they do in the larger radius. I said if you hate math, you're absolutely gonna hate this, but I don't know how else to talk about the efficiency. All right, I'm going to try to move on to a little bit more, I guess, prescriptive, recommendations. Like where might you blockade? And I really have the Union in mind. I have to think through whether this is going to ever make sense for the CSA to make that trade. This is obviously one of the areas I recommend going to. And you're going to start with ships here anyways. But yeah, you can see parked right there, we capture all those ports. So the area in the Chesapeake Bay is one area I would look at. Another area over here, and yeah, okay. Let's talk about the areas. The Wilmington Moorhead. So this is Moorhead up here. This is Wilmington. This little area here, I think you can do it. To preface what I was going to talk about, look at how much they go away. 15 million. I mean, that's you don't want that going through for free. You want to be trying to interdict as much of that as possible as part of the economic war. All right, one of the 2 areas I identify as heavily guarded is the Savannah, Port Royal, Charleston, and it's primarily because of Charleston. Right, they got 2 level 2 forts, Fort Sumter, and they got a level 3 port back here in Charleston Harbor that you want to get at. What's nice is that they're relatively close. But this is a third area. I think you're definitely going to want to go ahead and blockade. I don't know how much Charleston Harbor is getting in it. Yeah, it's only $11 million in tax revenue, which actually is less than Wilmington. But there is money here, and so if you want to, go after their economy, think about how you do that. And I just realized this is there's a potential great value opportunity right here, and I think it's at Port Royal. Without taking that fort down, I think you can sneak a ship right here and get the 2.5x. The other thing I learned from the tutorial you will never see is that if you capture this fort, you capture Port Royal. This is huge. When I talk about ironclads, and well, I've already talked about it a little bit, and their refueling problems, if you can get a nice port like that, that allows them, right, if you're going to send them around to, I don't know, Florida or something like that, or to try to take maybe hop, right, different kind of island hopping down into the Florida Keys, they need somewhere to go. And so Port Royal, and you'll hold the fort, which will also defend the port while they're not there, but it saves them. If you don't hold that and you don't take another port, they got to go all the way back up here to the Chesapeake to outfit it. They're never going to make it. So it's a level 1 fort. It's kind of a gimme, and I think that it's a good early steal. And once you take Port Royal, the Confederacy doesn't get the tax revenue from it. So something to think about. This area, I didn't run into it in this playthrough, but in the previous playthrough, the AI did something I think accidentally really good. It left ships in the harbor that I couldn't attack unless I moved close enough for the fort to engage me. And when the fort, and it was a tiny fleet, engaged me, they absolutely wrecked me, even though they shouldn't have. But there we go. Jacksonville is kind of, well, it's Fernandina. It's got a lot of tax revenue. It's an unguarded. There is a fort here. It is not well placed to defend this from the sea. So you could get a fleet down here. You could get it inside its combat range, and you can get that 2.5x cap on there, and you can inflict a lot of damage. So I treat this as its own thing, Fernandina, but early in the game you might consider it part of the Charleston to Savannah. All right, fourth area, yeah, Apalachiola. I didn't pronounce it right before either. Cedar Key and Tampa. You can pretty much get a fleet here, a fleet here, a fleet to defend them, or several small fleets, and you can shut down these ports. You see that they got some money in them, right? 5.6, 7 million. Again, if you want to leave them open, go ahead and do it. The other heavily guarded area is this area. I say it's Pensacola to New Orleans. I don't think one fleet can actually get both at once. They can come very close. But basically this area from Pensacola over here to New Orleans. You see they get 22 million through that level 3 port. So you want to try to take that down as much as you can. It's a challenge to do. You got a lot of level 2 forts around this area, and we'll talk about how to take them, because I'm also going to do fort attacking in this tutorial. It was harder to separate them. But that's a heavy lift. And then in a completely unguarded coast of, I think it's 4. Oh, I forgot about Port Isabel. Well, I guess it's okay if I did. But it's basically from Corpus Christi up to Sabine, the Sabine Pass, right? Because that's getting quite a bit of tax revenue as well, and there are no forts there to protect them. So those are the areas I kind of think of them. At least that's how I think of them. All right. What about interior blockades or blockades on basically river ports? I have not found any that I can really justify. When you look at the value, the tax revenue, it's 155,000. Right? I don't know. I mean, maybe it seems like it's a lot to you. On the Union's end, there's a little bit more. So Cairo here, Cincinnati gets about the same value. It's about 500,000. But Nashville, it 130,000. When you compare that to the cost of blockading these other ports, it just doesn't seem worth it. I don't know. I haven't found a real exception yet. I think you're going to have enough to do blockading the coastal ports to not really worry about the interior river ports. If that's really your thing or there are exceptions, you can let me know. One thing I'm not going to cover in this video, and I understand it, but I don't really understand it, is blockading trade nodes. So on the face of it, it's just like, my goodness, it's just like blockading ports. You get a fleet out here. It has to have the Sea Raider perk. And basically the easiest way to get to it is to just set a fleet to blockade and set its perk to Sea Raider, and then set it out here, and then it will raid these trade nodes. And it uses the same thing. Big circle, some damage. Small circle, 2.5 times that damage. And so you might want to click on the trade node to see, all right, well, that's got a lot of transport capacity. What's flowing through here? All this other stuff, right? That's a big one. 136, 670. Okay, that's much less trade capacity. All right, so anyways, you could do it like that. So why don't we just leave it there? Because I don't know what any of that means, right? The Sea Raiders perk says that, at its maximum, at its level 3, it will raise import prices by 50%. Well, 50% of what? So think about two different examples. If I have a ship tender gunboat here with a level 3 Sea Raider perk, right? I'm putting what? A 5% blockade on this? A 12.5% blockade on this? Now, would that mean that just automatically that all the imports that come through here are at 50% higher prices, or does it have to, or is it a factor? Like out of 100% blockade, like if you're at 50% blockade of this trade node, it will raise prices 50%. So since it's not 100%, if it was like 50%, it might raise import prices by 25%. And is it only import prices from that country? And is it through that trade node in that country? Right? Because there are different Great Britain and France trade nodes. And so I would go for the big ones, right? I would just sit small fleets on here, and I would go after that stuff. But since I don't know if it matters the percentage that it's blocked, I can't really tell you. I can't really tell you if it's good. It's going to require testing, and I think it's going to require a lot of testing. So I'm not eager to do that. I think I've bitten off enough to chew on in this trade node. The idea of the Sea Raider perk is interesting, but how it actually works, I don't know. I don't know that anybody has actually found out and make sure that it works a certain way. All right. I did a bunch of fort attacks. I attacked a bunch of forts with monolithic fleets. So fleets that were usually all of one thing or all of another. And the general takeaway is that wooden ships are terrible for attacking forts. And there aren't that many exceptions. Even your junky level 1 forts. Like, think about this Fort Hatteras one. So I sent 7 4th-rate steamers. They got wrecked. They did almost nothing to the fort. I sent a fleet of 4 barks and 3 brigs, which are pretty much... You don't remember what those look like. Those are low also on the totem pole here, but they're down here. They're pretty cheap, and they fight pretty cheap. They actually did worse than the 4th-rate steamers, which is not that surprising. And they did even less damage, a few percentage points maybe of damage to the fort. 7 sloops of war, which I expected a bit more from. They also got wrecked. Luckily, they only lost 1 ship. So one of the things about the Navy is that the faster the ship, the more likely it is to escape combat that it's going to lose without sinking. And so that is kind of nice. We only lost 1, but at the end, the fort condition was still at 93%. We did very little to it. Meanwhile, I put 7 ironclad river gunboats. So this was at the Fort Donelson and Company over here. Whoa. I don't think it actually was Fort Donelson. I don't know if I'll be able to recreate it here. But they did extremely well against this. Yeah, so anyways, that's fun to listen to. And you can see we've already ticked it down a little bit. I don't really want to sit here and talk about this too much. So definitely the Ironclads had a good matchup against... I'm going to get out of this combat so we don't have to hear that going on. They did quite well, the Ironclad river gunboats. I also attacked some level 2 forts. Down here, I don't think it was either of these fleets that currently exist, but they were like these fleets. No, it was like this fleet, I think. Yeah, it actually was this fleet. So I had these guys attack this level 2 fort, and now that I do it, we're probably going to lose. But the first time we did it, we won, but we lost 2 of our frigates, and the average health of the remaining 5 ships was about 75%. So think about that. Especially now, I'll give these guys... It won't help them in the combat, but it will help us capture the fort if we do go after it. So frigates can take level 2, and by extension, that means they're good against level 1s. I would presume that against a level 1 fort, these guys would take it, and probably all ships would survive. But I think really only frigates and maybe steam frigates of the wooden ships are the ones you should think about putting against level 1 forts. And I don't know about level 2 forts. I had a decent experience. I put a bit of a mixed-up fleet of 4 sidewheel frigates and 3 steam sloops. I lost 1, and then when I tried to manually withdraw the fleet, it disintegrated. So that is the second time that's happened. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good ending, but before they got wiped, they took the fort condition down to about 55%. The sidewheel frigate is not cheap. You want to keep that in mind, and maybe it would have done slightly less well than the 6 regular frigates. I don't know. That's speculation. I can tell you what happened, and just leave the rest up to you. I put 7 double enders up against the level 2 fort, kind of just for kicks, and they did 5% damage to it, and then they got wrecked. So I don't even think I would put double enders up against the fort, the level 1s. And there aren't that many level 1s, but remember, if you are looking for a good one, I think I think this might not be a bad one to try to go for in the early game. The Ironclads did much better in their level 2 tests, and I did them all over the place. But yeah, Wilmington, well, there is this level 1, but then there's also the level 2 across from it. But you only got to take it up to level 1, I think, to be able to get the port. 7 Ironclad monitors against their level 2 fort. It took them about a month. They won. The most damage a ship got was 70%. The fleet average was about 80%. But they did expend basically all their provisions, and they had to go back to port. But that's just true of Ironclads in general. 7 Ironclad gunboats, level 2 fort. It took also about a month. We didn't lose any ships. One ship did get down to 50%, but most were around 80% health when it was over. And so I like that. Level 3 fort, I did for giggles, and I think I did it somewhere. It doesn't matter because it's not happening here. I think I did it down here against Fort Morgan. 7 Ironclad monitors. It looked like we won, that we had got the fort condition to basically 0. One of my ships in the fleet withdrew on its own. Another was heavily damaged. The problem was that we ran low on ammo, and I've run through this in different Ironclad monitor tests. They do tend to run out of ammo in prolonged engagements. So I manually withdrew the fleet, and then it disintegrated. So I guess there's actually a third time that's happened to me. It seems like there's a pattern here. I'm confident, though, that if there was maybe an 8th or 9th monitor, or just additional firepower, they would have stayed, and they could have taken that level 3 fort. But otherwise, I don't have great solutions for how you take a level 3. This looks like our combat here is done. Nope, I spoke too soon. So you can see we already lost the USS Cumberland, and this is how the rest of the fleet is going. They're still at 75% health. I don't like, this is completely unrelated to anything, I don't like the way these combats work, because I can shoot them down to basically, 10 men left. They'll take all those casualties, the fort condition will be like 15%, and they'll still be eager. And I'm like, eager for what? The ship's done, you've taken horrendous casualties, you can't operate any of your guns realistically, even if it says they can. And so it becomes this very weird, drawn-out thing that gives the forts an advantage I don't think they should have. And the other thing is that when I modded this to add more men to the forts, all the auto-resolve did was kill more of their men in the forts. It didn't really do any more damage to me, and it also didn't really keep them alive any longer. Alright, so the basic takeaway is level 1 forts, frigates, fine. Probably sidewheel frigates, steam frigates. Basically, if it's wooden and it's got frigate in its name, it'll probably be okay against level 1 forts. It's going to be real dicey against some level 2 forts. You're probably going to take quite a bit of damage, as we are witnessing right now, but you should be able to do it. I think it's just probably going to be costly. There are cheaper options. Send in the Ironclad monitors to do it. And then the level 3s, don't put any wooden ships in those combats unless you're just willing to lose a whole bunch of money to do this. So the last part of the story is kind of building on the what do you do about it. We covered kind of where do you go, but what kind of fleet construction might you want to think about? How micro-intensive do you want this to be? Right, this is just the campaign map. Never mind the micro of land battles. The most efficient way to do it is to create a bunch of one-ship fleets, like 100 of them. Do you really want to do that? I don't. It's not a. I don't think it's a great idea. What you can do in an area like this, because the only fort you really need to worry about, it's a significant one because there's a garrison in that fort. But again, it doesn't really seem to do all that much for the fort's defense. I kind of recommend building a couple of attacking squadrons, which are basically just going to be comprised of Ironclad monitors and Ironclad gunboats. The exception would be, what do you do with your starting steam and regular frigates? And I think you actually do. You don't attack. But what you would do is you bring them down here and set them to attack stance. You have a whole bunch of the smaller here. We'll stay on this map for now, but we'll have a whole bunch of the smaller fleets. I don't want to do one ship fleets. I would say maybe 2 or 3 ships per fleet, and have them get. They're not going to be able to get close enough as long as these forts are still standing. But have them here. Try to get as many of their circles to overlap and shut these down, and then set the maybe 2 attacking fleets out here, frigates and steam frigates. Have one patrol from here to defend another fleet, or several small fleets that are here. Again, maybe 2 or 3 fleets of 2 or 3 efficient blockading ships. And then have the other fleet run over here, back over to the center. Just have them patrol in attack mode. And then maybe at each one of these ports or near them, have 2 or 3 fleet, not at each one, but in this whole gulf here, maybe have 3 fleets, 4 fleets of 2 to 3 efficient blockading ships. And I'll turn back to the Excel sheet now and just show you what they are. All right, so these, remember, these are the, as far as I know, the more efficient blockading ships. I think the 4th rate steamers, I don't remember how long they can stay at sea. They can stay at sea at least 60 days, which, since this is going to be a prolonged operation, isn't a bad idea. In that light, I don't know if the 3rd rate, yeah, actually the 3rd rate steamers, 3rd rate steamers look pretty good because they go back to re-equip less often. So think about maybe including them in there as well. Barks, brigs, motor schooners are all, I think it's schooner. I don't think it's schooner. But anyways, they're all fairly efficient. I don't know exactly how long they stay out. Barks and brigs, they stay out 100 days each. So yeah, I do kind of like those. And in groups of 2 or 3, on the unguarded ports, remember you have a lot of those in Texas. Just, put those fleets in combat range right on top, and get the 2.5x going on, and you should be good to go there. Where else do we have here? Do we have anything left? I guess I wasn't as paused as I thought. Oh no, I did unpause it. That is right. All right. Because I'm too lazy to edit it out, we're back in here. So yeah, because they're unguarded, you can put those smaller fleets right on top of there. Keep your distance over here, but just protect the blockading ships from others. Have 1 or 2 fleets of 2 to 3 ships each. Try to get their that small combat center right on Fernandina, and shut that one down. Over here, I've already said what I would do, but try to get, you're going to need an ironclad group down here, because generally a lot of squadrons tend to come out of this region. But try to make short work of this and capture this port. It's one less thing to do. I would say after that, if you can work down Savannah, it should be a little bit easier not to crack, but you got to do it with the combat fleet. Otherwise, just have your small fleets. You probably don't need to move them too far apart. So maybe even 3 fleets of like 2 ships. Set them to blockade. Their circles should cover the Charleston port and the Savannah port and Port Royal until you're able to take it. And I think you got to go for Charleston last because of that level 3 fort. You may not even go for it in 1861. You may start building some ironclad frigates and maybe try to take it at some point in 62. And if that's the case, that's fine, right? You don't have to take every fort. You want to do this in a way that's cost effective. I would also recommend you have, in addition to some ironclad fleet that's dedicated to taking these down, if you're able to take this port, the ironclads can work out of this port, I assume. I haven't actually tried it. But they can re-equip here, and it makes things much easier, and then they can patrol from here in Florida to maybe up here. The problem with this area is that you also tend to get raiders that come out of North Carolina through here. And so I don't think you can just have 1 fleet blockading. You might need to have 2 or 3, again, small fleets, and maybe an attacking fleet that just moves on patrol behind it. That's got to be it. There can't be more to say. No, there isn't. There are two things that two other things I'll mention I didn't get in here, which is how do you fight against blockading fleets? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in here from the CSA's perspective. I'm going to bring these fleets out and line them up probably in defensive mode and then just challenge 1v1 and figure out what the results are. And then I also got to take a look at how blockading trade nodes work. All right, this went super long. It's never supposed to go this long, but that is how blockading and fort taking works, at least as far as the tests I've done go. And again, this is really geared in 1861 to 1862 when you're starting out. If you want to go for those big ships, which I generally don't like because they seem too expensive, and by that point in the game, by 63, you're probably doing well enough on land and you've done enough harm elsewhere that their economy is tanking. Plus, I've said this in other videos, but I'll say it here. In the background of this game, and I'll show you. All right, well, it escapes me for a moment. Well, it took me more than a moment, but it used to be in the modding Excel folder, and it showed you that basically from 1860 to 1865 that there are growth rates that are kind of programmed in, and I assume, knowing this game, there's probably some sort of linear movement from the 1860 1865. 1860 is growth and 1865 is near depression, and so the overall game economy kind of drags down over time, not to mention the damage you're likely doing to their economy. They're probably not going to be able to import as much, and then you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it to keep spending a lot on the Navy when the other side isn't able to import as much as it was? And there might be a point where it makes sense to scuttle a bunch of your ships, save yourself the money, and invest in land forces. All right, folks. I hope this taught you something, and yeah, look forward to bringing those tests on how to fight these blockading fleets in a future video.